Yo, what up? It's B-Cide. So today I wanted to come on here and talk about this New York Times list and the whole conversation that's been happening online about the 30 greatest American songwriters. And honestly, this video isn't about me being angry that certain artists made the list, or didn't make the list, whatever. And, I'm not mad that people like Taylor Swift are on there. I'm not mad that Jay-Z's on there. I'm not mad that modern artists are on there. I'm not mad that rappers are on there. I'm a rapper. And I understand how important rap songwriting is, but after listening to the New York Times podcast where they explained how they made the list, and after watching Rick Beato respond to it, something about the conversation just really rubbed me the wrong way. And I think a lot of musicians felt that same thing. And, Rick Beato is somebody, if you're not familiar with him, that reviews music and has been involved in music for his entire life. And I pay attention to what he does. And, that's what's going on with Rick. So I pay attention to what he's doing. And, that's why I ended up watching this thing. So, I feel like a lot of musicians felt the same way that Rick did. And, not because the list was subjective, because all music lists are subjective, but because the people discussing the songwriting sounded disconnected from actual songwriting itself. And, that's the part that really bothered me. I've been making music for over 25 years. I've written songs, recorded songs, I've performed songs, I've mixed those songs, I study songs, I've watched crowds react to songs, I've watched people cry to songs, I've watched people scream lyrics back at songs. So, when I hear people talking about songwriting almost entirely through cultural theory instead of actual music craftsmanship, it kind of feels weird to me, really. And one of the things that really stood out to me was when they basically reduced traditional songwriting into this stereotype of a white guy with a guitar struggling through his emotions. That line immediately bothered me. It was utterly ridiculous. Not that there's anything wrong with expanding songwriting beyond that, Of course, songwriting is bigger than that. Songwriting can be rap, metal, punk, R&B, pop, folk, experimental music, whatever you want. But the way they talked about traditional songwriting felt really dismissive. And honestly, American music itself is built from a whole cross pollination anyway. You've got blues, you got gospel, you got jazz, rock, hip hop, country, soul music, all these genres influenced each other. So reducing songwriting traditions into stereotypes just feels lazy to me. And what's crazy is I listen to all kinds of music, okay? I'd say I'm not just boxed into one particular genre of music. I listen to Insane Clown Posse. I listen to Green Day. I listen to Metallica. I listen to Eminem. I listen to Billy Joel. I listen to Cypress Hill. I listen to Sam Cooke. I listen to Burner. I listen to Phil Collins. I listen to Duran Duran. I listen to Wiz Khalifa. I listen to Jay-Z. I listen to all this different stuff. Different artists, all different genres, all different styles of songwriting, And that's the whole point. Great songwriting doesn't sound one specific way. Sometimes it's technical lyricism. Sometimes it's storytelling. Sometimes it's melody. Sometimes it's simplicity. Sometimes it's hooks. Sometimes it's just the whole atmosphere. And sometimes it's the whole emotional honesty of the thing. And honestly, that's why I think this list became so controversial, because the criteria kept changing and they kept moving goalposts for the criteria. So, sometimes they talk about influence, sometimes they talked about emotional vulnerability, sometimes they talked about innovation, sometimes they talked about representation, sometimes they talked about expanding the definition of songwriting. But certain artists that obviously but certain artists, then there's certain artists that obviously deserve discussion somehow, and they somehow didn't make the cut. If Taylor Swift is there because of generational impact in songwriting connecting with fans, yeah, okay, that's fair enough. But then how come Metallica wasn't part of the conversation? If Jay-Z is there because of lyrical impact and influence on rap songwriting, okay, that's fair enough. But how come Eminem is not part of the conversation? Okay, that's where people start feeling the criteria became inconsistent. Yeah. And honestly, one of the craziest parts of the whole podcast was them admitting they didn't even spend enough time actually listening to the music together while making this list. And I'll tell you what, it absolutely blew my mind, because songwriting isn't just theory, you people from the New York Times. It's feeling, it's structure, it's melody, it's tension and release of that tension, it's rhythm, it's hooks, it's phrasing, it's replay value, it's emotional connection. A song survives because human beings connect to it. And that's what matters. And look, I guess, I'm not saying these people shouldn't have opinions, but opinions are like assholes. And that doesn't mean that I have to listen to them. And I do think there's a difference between analyzing culture and actually understanding the process of creating music. Those are two different perspectives. And honestly, the older I get, the more I realize greatness in songwriting can come from anywhere. A punk band, a rapper, a metal band, a pop artist, a singer songwriter, an underground artist, a mainstream artist. A great song is a great song. And I think sometimes critics forget that regular people experience music emotionally first and intellectually second. And that's why songs last forever. Not because they fit a theory, not because they check special boxes for you, but not because they're academically interesting because of you and your Ivy League educations, but because they connect with people regardless of where you come from. You know, it doesn't matter where you come from. That's why songs connect with people, rich or poor. But anyways, that's really just my perspective on it. Oh, and honestly, I'd really love to hear what you think in the comments. Seriously, who do you think are some of the greatest songwriters ever? Talk in the comments. Stay strong. Stay wicked. It's B-Cide. Like, subscribe, comment, share this with your friends. All right. Peace out.